The first selection is from my upcoming novel, The Condor's Shadow. My major character in this novel has been on the run for 20 years because of a tragedy in his past and has been living under a succession of assumed names. Now in his mid-30s, he has settled quite comfortably into a job as a journalist and is known to everyone in the town of Rolling Hills, Montana, as Clayton Poole. And I should just add, perhaps, for those of you who might not know what a morgue is in newspaper terms. A morgue is the files that you keep, both of your own newspaper and of other newspapers, for what benefit they may accrue to you. But every newspaper has a morgue. Over many months, Clayton had become an avid reader of newspapers from Pacific Northwest communities, all available to him in the Rolling Hills Gazette's morgue, usually at night. After all, he'd been to most of those places, worked in most. While still keeping a low profile, he'd nevertheless had small adventures in most. So on such occasions, he'd take the keys from the secretary's desk, unlock the room behind the printing press, select a few recent issues, more from places he'd been than places he'd not, and page through, scanning for anything interesting. Pocatello was represented, and Boise, as were Bellingham, Bozeman, Ellensburg, Corvallis, Klamath Falls, Coeur d'Alene, a few others. But the one he never failed to check was Southeast City, Washington. And there in that community's clarion, as summer drew to a close, he discovered something that made the hairs on the back of his neck crawl. Tucked in among announcements about the Sweet Onion Festival, the awarding of the annual Kiwanis Club scholarships, and the issuing of new park rules by the city council, was a follow-up article on a shooting that had taken place a week earlier. A woman, name withheld, had admitted to the killing of her estranged husband, a former felon, and was in jail awaiting arraignment. The prosecutor had not yet decided what charges would be filed. As he read on, Clayton's breath stopped. In its last paragraph, the story mentioned that the weapon used, a Savage Model 24, was unregistered, and so the woman claimed had been left to her some years earlier by a person she refused to name. The newspaper, in a flamboyant touch, referred to this person as the mysterious stranger. The moment he finished reading, Clayton rose to his feet involuntarily and breathed a few short, shallow breaths. "Holy shit," he muttered. And again, "Holy shit." Hours later, after unbroken pacing and thinking in his room, Clayton called his editor and asked to meet him at the Iron Penny. When Frank arrived, he found Clayton in a booth, an empty brandy glass in front of him. After the two had ordered fresh drinks, Clayton cleared his throat and told Frank he needed to leave Rolling Hills immediately. When his boss probed him for a reason, he said only that something had come up elsewhere that demanded his immediate attention. He said he was sorry, but he had no choice. He had to go. The editor looked at him across the table, took a swallow of beer, rubbed his chin. Finally, he nodded and said, "You're him, ain't you?" Clayton felt a cold wind pass through him. "What do you mean, Frank? I'm who?" the mysterious stranger. You left the morgue files in a bit of disarray, very unlike you. So I scanned the newspaper on top and my eyes settled on that story. That's how come you feel you need to leave. I'm damn sure of it. But what I don't know is why. Tell me, Clayton. Clayton was silent, so the editor continued. If you go, you'll be leaving a very good thing here, you know. You've worked your way into this community and become something of a linchpin, so to speak. We'd hate to see you go, Clayton. Hell, I'd hate to see you go. So please, tell me what it is that's going on. I figure you owe me that much. At the editor's "you owe me," Clayton closed his eyes, slumped in his seat, shook his head slowly side to side. Then his head stopped, but his jaw moved back and forth. He opened his eyes, looked around the room to signal the barmaid for another brandy. He clasped his large hands around the side of his head, fingers loosely interlocked over his scalp. He closed his eyes again, tilted his head upward, rocked back and forth a time or two. Across the table, Frank observed the struggle his newfound friend was going through and wondered what in thunder could cause such consternation. Finally, Clayton returned his attention to his friend and employer, looked him in the eyes. "You're right," he said. "I owe you. So here goes." And I'll stop this piece there.